Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. Not long ago, the Vatican came out with the document Dignitas Infinita, where it goes over the infinite dignity of all persons. And in it, towards the end of the document, as we reviewed here on the show, it addresses the question of transgenderism and also sex surgeries. So we looked at the document, and it was against anyone undergoing any kind of gender affirming surgeries, as they call them. And so it was pretty negative on the whole. But the head for the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, Cardinal Fernandez, recently gave a lecture that some estimate to be making some exceptions for the church's position on this matter and allowing for a person to change their gender through some kind of surgery in rare cases. And so we need to take a look at what Fernandez has said and what people are saying Fernandez is saying as well in the news, because it's been, all over CNN, New York Times, and stuff like that, even though it's actually, for some reason, slipped under the radar. This was a lecture that he delivered a few weeks ago, but I think because Pope Francis has been sick, it slipped under the radar, and it really hasn't gotten the attention that you would think this would have received. But the media is starting to talk about it. Like I said, New York Times, CNN, and all the big names. And so we need to take a look at what Fernandez said in this lecture. So let me first start out with, of course, Father James Martin weighing in on the question, never allowing an opportunity like this to pass by. Always capitalizing on them. Of course, he's very thrilled with the controversy on the matter. He says on Twitter, in the midst of the focus on the Holy Father's illness, a lecture by the Cardinal Victor Fernandez, prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, reflecting on Dignitas Infinita, was somewhat overlooked, especially his comments towards the end on transgender people seemed like a pastoral response to the reality of the suffering and struggle that many transgender people face. I'm using a machine translation of the original Italian, and then he goes on to give an excerpt from the lecture, which we're going to read now. Rather than read his copy of it, we're going to just go straight to the source, and we're going to take a look at the section here, section 4, called The Body. This is again from Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez on the Vatican website, prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, from a lecture called The Ontological Dignity of the Person and Dignitas Infinita, Some Clarifications, lecture at Catholic Theological Faculty of Cologne. So this is supposed to shed some light on that document that came out, Dignitas Infinita, that was on the whole critical of transgender surgeries. Now, going to the relevant section here. Let's start here. He says, we are not referring to the body in itself. Let me maybe try to maximize. Doesn't show the whole screen if I do it. Never mind. We are not referring to the body in itself, but to the body of a person, and not that of a corpse, but to the body that belongs to the person, expresses him, allows him to enter into a relationship. The body in the Bible, in fact, includes the matter of this body. But it is more than that matter, because it has been transfigured to become a means of expression, communication, encounter, relationship. Corporeality is our way of reflecting on the Trinitarian relationships in this world. On the other hand, without the body, there is not, strictly speaking, a human person. In the Summa Theologica, it is argued that for the human spirit, being separated from the body is outside of its nature. As Dignitas Infinita recalls, quoting the Catechism, that the human body participates in the dignity of the image of God. It continues, the document invites us to recognize the consequences of this belief when it rejects gender ideology and sex change. Pope Francis teaches that creation precedes us and must be recognized as a gift. At the same time, we are called to protect our humanity. And this means, first of all, respecting it and accepting it as it was created. So far, so good, right? Sounds like it's, affirming the traditional teaching on the church being against transgender surgeries. He says sex change is not a merely external change or comparable to normal cosmetic surgery or an intervention to cure a disease. It is a claim of a change of identity, of wanting to be another person. In this case, the evaluation of oneself under the influence of a technocratic paradigm leads us to think that human freedom, made omnipotent thanks to technology, can create an alternative reality as it wishes. Now, here is going to be where we get into the controversial part. He says, we do not want to be cruel and say that we do not want to understand the conditioning of people and the deep suffering that exists in some cases of dysphoria that manifests itself even from childhood. When the document uses the expression normally, it does not exclude that there are cases outside the norm, such as strong dysphorias that can lead to an unbearable existence or even suicide. Okay, so that is the part right here. He's saying there are some exceptions to the church's position that's against transgender surgeries. The exceptions being if this leads to an unbearable existence or even a person considering suicide. So if the person considers suicide or believes they have an unbearable existence with their God assigned gender, he says there's some exceptions here. He says these exceptional situations must be evaluated with great care. What we are saying is that the ideology that usually accompanies many decisions to change sex includes the denial of reality given as a gift, with the idea that sexual bodily identity can be the object of a radical change, always subject to the desires and claims of freedom of each individual, in the same way as the claim of omnipotence that lies behind gender ideologies. At the end of this brief reflective journey, we can reiterate with healthy pride what St. Paul VI said. He says, no anthropology equals that of the church on the human person. Okay. So, again, the ground zero moment here is going to be that part right there. When the document uses the expression normally, it does not exclude that there are cases outside the norm. So he's wanting to say Dignitas Infinita is generally against transgender surgeries. But he says because it states that that's normally the case, that then means there's some exceptions. And now he tells us the clarification being strong dysphorias that can lead to unbearable existence or even suicide. All right. Now, when we go to the original document, that's not exactly what it said. Now, Fernandez is the author of the document. Pope Francis has approved Dignitas Infinita, and therefore it's magisterial. But Fernandez is the author. And here's how he interprets his own words. First, he says, in Dignitas Infinita, it follows that any sex change intervention, as a rule, notice that, as a rule, that's the part that he's latching on to. He's saying, well, it's talking about as a rule, we're generally against transgender surgeries. As a rule, it risks threatening the unique dignity the person has received from the moment of conception. But he wants to say, well, because it says as a rule, that means there's exceptions. Now, those are not the exceptions he initially told us in Dignitas Infinita. Instead, he gave us a different exception. He says, this is not to exclude the possibility that a person with genital abnormalities that are already evident at birth or that develop later may choose to receive the assistance of healthcare professionals to resolve these abnormalities. However, in this case, such a medical procedure would not constitute a sex change in the sense intended here. Okay, so what we're noticing is in Dignitas Infinita, it's against sex change surgeries. as a rule. Now, when it says as a rule, that means there's exceptions, but the exception he gives us is a person who has some kind of condition, some kind of genital abnormality that requires surgical um, assistance and healthcare. That was the exception he gave us at the time. And it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. That's something different. That's not a person trying to change their identity or thinking that they're one thing and they're actually another. No, this is a person with a genital abnormality, and this is actually rectifying it. And so it's not actually a sex change. Okay, that's what Dignitas Infinita originally said. But now he's coming back with a different exception, an exception that he didn't give us initially in the document. And he says, when the document uses the expression normally, and I guess that's the part when he says as a general rule or as a rule, it does not exclude that there are cases outside the norm, but then he gives us different cases than the ones before, such as strong dysphorias that can lead to an unbearable existence or even suicide. That's different than a person with genital abnormalities. Yes, maybe a person with genital abnormalities might feel that they're undergoing an unbearable existence and may be tempted to suicide, but there are plenty of others who do not have genital abnormalities who might feel that, as they currently are, they have an unbearable existence and are tempted to suicide. So, this is a much broader category that would allow, that would sneak in. It's the uh, crack in the dam that would introduce a lot of other stuff. So if a person, not with a genital abnormality, but a person who just feels that they just can't go on with their God-given assigned gender, and they feel that, this is just going to harm their existence, it's absolutely unbearable. Well, at this point, the church may say, well, we can make an exception here. Okay, that's the exception they're going to drive a whole truck through. Because everyone in the world is at that point going to say, yeah, I got an unbearable existence the way I am. And yeah, I'm feeling suicidal. And so at that point, you can basically make the exception the rule. And pretty much everyone is going to claim this as the basis for their intentions in sex uh, surgeries. So this is why some people feel that this is perhaps the Vatican opening up to sex gender or sex change surgeries. You can certainly see why people would see it that way. This is a lecture by Victor Manuel Fernandez, the head of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. For those of y'all who are wondering, no, it's not magisterial. There's no papal approbation behind it. But there's also no papal rebuke behind it either. And there likely won't be. Pope Francis is in the hospital. I don't know how much he's even aware of this. But I do suspect that even if he were aware, he wouldn't come out and rebuke Fernandez. That's just certainly not in keeping with the way he does things. And I don't even know Pope Francis's position on the matter, if he would agree with these exceptions. So I don't know if he would even be inclined to disagree with Fernandez. He might just kind of feel like, well, leave it to the experts, leave it to the theologians, leave it to the Fernandezes of the world to figure these things out. So certainly concerning to see this, because it's this kind of language, it's this kind of stuff that people are going to drive, like I say, a whole truck through whenever you start using exceptions like these. That crack in the dam is going to widen over time. And it's kind of like the case with abortion. As soon as they started making some exceptions to it, the common exceptions, it became more and more and more acceptable. And I wonder if that's what's going on here. Aside from the fact that these exceptions that he's referring to are highly controversial, and many Catholics are not going to agree with Fernandez's exceptions here in rereading of his own document. One wonders if he intentionally put in the document the language, "it follows that any sex change as a rule." One wonders if he put that in there intentionally to later on exploit it with other exceptions that he doesn't mention initially in this document. One wonders. Now, ultimately, we don't know his intentions, but you do kind of wonder now that he is capitalizing on this exceptional language here and then introduces a new exception that he didn't initially tell us. Truly concerning to see that. Here's something from CNN reporting on the matter. Like I said, Father James Martin, of course, is jumping on it on his Twitter. CNN is jumping on it. Ari in the comment says, "I'm glad it's not magisterial." True, but there's a lot of damage that can be done by the Vatican outside of magisterial acts, right? Dicasteries can do a lot of damage. The Vatican can do a lot of damage without even lifting a magisterial finger. Popes can do a lot of damage without even lifting a magisterial finger. As I've said before, to illustrate this, a pope committing a scandalous act in public, like sleeping with another man's wife, which one pope did and was killed in the process. Very scandalous, scandalized numerous people. But he didn't lift a magisterial finger in that act of fornication. But it still scandalized numerous people. Like I said, popes can do a lot of damage outside of their magisterium. Just watch the video I did yesterday on the cadaver synod, and please take note of the amount of damage that popes did in that case. In that instance, they are acting in their magisterium, and they did a whole lot of damage in their magisterium on that matter. But okay, I think you get the point. Now let's go to CNN. Vatican clarifies its position on gender affirming surgery, calling for greater care and a case-by-case approach. So CNN, New York Times, Father James Martin, the usuals, they're picking up on what Fernandez was saying in the document as far as exceptions. They say the Vatican appears to have modified its position against gender affirming surgery and gender theory last year, raising the possibility of exceptional situations. You know how I actually found out about this article? There was an Orthodox priest who I've actually interviewed on this show before, until he started saying some insanely wild stuff on Twitter, and I no longer had him on. But there was an Orthodox priest who shared this on social media, and he's like, well, there goes the Vatican, and they're now caving in on the sex surgery deal. And he shared this article. So this is, again, what's being promoted now in the news. But in this case, there's actually truth rooted in the matter whenever you look at what Fernandez is saying. It says this week, the Vatican published a speech by Doctrine Chief Cardinal Victor Emmanuel Fernandez, where he said that there are cases outside the norm, such as strong dysphorias, that can lead to an unbearable existence or even suicide. These exceptional situations must be evaluated with great care. A very fancy way of basically saying, yeah, we're going to allow for some exceptions if a person feels that they're suicidal or can't continue in their existence if they go with their gender that God has assigned to them at birth. The Argentinian prelate, speaking to a theology conference in Cologne, Germany, explained, "We don't want to be cruel and say that we don't understand people's conditioning and the deep suffering that exists in some cases of dysphoria that manifests itself from even childhood." I think everybody agrees. I don't know anybody who wants to be cruel here. I'm pretty sure everybody wants to help people who are suffering through dysphoria. The question is, how do you do that? Is it by giving them the green light to sex change surgeries? Or is it by counseling them, helping them in other ways? That's the question. I don't really know anybody who wants to be, um, apathetic here or cruel or um, anything like that. I think most people are sincere and want to help people who are struggling with this situation, or at least I would hope that's what most people would want for a person who's struggling with this. But again, the question is, but how do you go about doing that? Is it by giving a pass to these surgeries? In April last year, the Vatican issued a strong warning against gender theory and said that any sex change intervention risks threatening the unique dignity of a person. The document signed by Pope Francis focused on what it describes as a range of threats to human dignity, including poverty, the death penalty, war, assisted dying, abortion, sexual abuse, and the abuse of women. Last year's text stated that attempts to obscure the sexual difference between man and woman, including gender-affirming surgery, should be rejected. It follows that any sex change intervention, as a rule, risks threatening the unique dignity the person has received from the moment of conception. While this week's publication on the Vatican site acknowledges the possibility of gender dysphoria, it still makes clear that the Church opposes the idea that bodily sexual identity can be the object of radical change, always subject to one's desires. But all a person has to do is say, no, it's not just based on me wanting to radically change and just changing my own desires. It's because I have an unbearable condition. It's unbearable for me to go forward with this, and I'm feeling suicidal, right? That's the way it's going to be presented, and always is presented that way. I do want to grab this from the chat. This person says this feels like a nothing burger. Well, you either are in denial or you didn't pay attention. Watch the video again. It says Pope Francis has in the past welcomed a community of transgender women to his weekly general audiences, while he signed off on a Vatican document permitting trans people to be godparents. This comes as the ailing 88-year-old Pope battles double pneumonia at Gemelli Hospital. When the hospital, the Pope has been making decisions such as calling a meeting of Pope and Cardinals to decide sainthood causes at an unspecified date, which some wonder, is he going to resign at that meeting? Because it was a similar meeting that Benedict called when he resigned. Okay, so you can see the news is picking up on this. This one was published just a few days ago. I guess about a week ago, March 5th. The lecture was prior to that. Let's see, the lecture is dated, I think it was a week or two before that. It doesn't actually have the date on it, but I think it was about a week or two before, because we reviewed another part of that lecture. So this is starting to come out. People are starting to talk about it. Father James Martins are, happy to see this and promoting it on their social media. CNN, New York Times, and all that are picking up on it. One wonders, if Pope Francis weren't sick, would he say anything about this? I don't think so. He generally doesn't correct errors anyway. We've noticed that from Pope Francis. He's very hesitant to correct cardinals and bishops. And I doubt very seriously he would correct Fernandez, his handpicked choice for the head of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. So I don't suspect that this is going to be withdrawn or changed or corrected. I think that this will be continue to remain on the Vatican website and will likely be the basis for further church reflections on the matter. Who knows? Maybe there will be a magisterial document in the future on the matter, and it will interact with this lecture. We'll see. I did think it was weird, though, that Fernandez put that language of as a rule in the original document, Dignitas Infinita, but did not give us this kind of exception, and now is pointing out to that language and gives us a different exception. Well, in fairness, his document or lecture is called Some Clarifications on Dignitas Infinita. But this is hardly a clarification that seems evident in the document. or expected, frankly. I don't think anybody really expected him to put this in the lecture. Be that as it may, I hope this was helpful in bringing it to your attention as far as what's going on here so you could be aware. Hopefully this has been also helpful in offering you some commentary and guidance on the matter. If it has, please hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see more videos like this, where I offer commentary on what's going on with the Vatican, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications, and consider supporting the channel at Patreon. I really do need people's help right now. If you can afford it, I know money is tight these days. I get it, especially after the holidays. But if you're able to support financially, please consider doing so this show can continue. The best way to do it is go to patreon.com/reason and theology and consider supporting me there at any of the levels of participation. And you also get access to extra content, but do give it some thought and prayers for consideration. All right, that's going to do it for today. I will see y'all tomorrow for another show. God bless. Hey, have you been benefiting from this channel, but you're not supporting it?
You're definitely guilty.
Get over to patreon.com/reason and theology and support this channel if you've been benefiting from the content.
Did I say get it done now?
I mean right now.
And if you can't support the show financially, you should at least be subscribed, right? Am I right or am I right?
Yeah, I think he's right.
I'm right. So go and hit the subscribe button right now. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and if you want to support the channel, visit patreon.com/reason and theology.